Hello, thank you for joining me. Welcome. Today I'm going to do a deep dive into the Pisces Full Moon, which occurs on the 2nd of September. If you're new to my channel, I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Also, you can download your free natal horoscope by clicking the link beneath this video. Or please join me on Twitter at HoroscopeAce and ask me any astrology questions. You can also join Elisa and I for the daily astrology and spirituality video show, which is proving really popular, and grab your free daily Zodiac forecast, written forecast every single day too. Now this chart that you can see on the screen is for Universal Central Time, and the event occurs at 5:22 a.m. Now in New York, in Eastern Time, it's at 1:22 a.m. on the 2nd of September. Now this is often known as the harvest moon for obvious reasons. In the Northern Hemisphere, we're gathering in the crops, we're coming to the end of the productive summer season, and we're reaping all the benefits. Now this particular chart, based on Universal Central Time, has a really strange dichotomy linked to it, because you can see the sun at 10 degrees 12 minutes in Virgo is actually just tucked up in the 12th house, and 12th house energy is very Piscean. Conversely, on the other side of the heavens, we have the moon in Pisces at 10 degrees 12, which is in the 6th house, which is very Virgo. Now this full moon is asking us essentially over the next 2 weeks to make sure that the practicality that's driven by the sun being in the sign of Virgo, and of course also Mercury, the planet that governs the sign of Virgo, is also in Virgo at this time, that we're not so caught up with the practicalities, the detail, the precision of Virgo, that we're forgetting about the other side of our situations, which is more to do with our emotions. It's more about keeping things in balance in terms of our senses. So it's making sure that we're practical and we're achieving our aims in terms of that Virgo virtue, if you like, of being very productive, very efficient, very organised, but we're not doing it in such a way that we're losing sight of the emotional dimension. And if there is something that's out of kilter, this full moon will bring it into the open in the next 2 weeks. And to that end, if you stay with me, I will give you your individual zodiac forecast for each of the 12 signs at the end of this broadcast. Now, the other interesting thing about this particular full moon is the role of Uranus. Uranus, of course, is the free radical of the zodiac. It's very much to do with rebellion, to do with freedom, to do with independence and individuality. But in the fixed sign of Taurus, it's in its full, F-A-L-L. That means it's in the opposite polarity to where it's exalted, which is in the sign of Scorpio. And of course, Taurus energy is very much about stability, whereas Uranus is about change and being open to the future. And also it's about essentially truth. And the truth at this particular juncture on this full moon is very much to do with communication, because it's in the second decan of Taurus, and as it reverses backwards, it will move into the first 10 degrees, because it reverses back to 6 degrees by the middle of January. Then of course it's going to be more influenced by Venus, which governs Taurus. But at this stage, I think we're talking about a lot to do with communication. And because of the three positions of the 12th, 6th and 9th house, it's possible that something can break into the open in a rather sudden way, because Uranus is a very quick moving electric energy. So if there has been something that we've not been conscious of, because the 12th house or Pisces energy can be where we're not quite as aware, then it could come about quite suddenly, and that may mean that we have to flex from the attention, the real scrutiny that we've been given to some strand in our situation with all that Virgo energy, because that's very much about the small picture, The 9th house in this particular chart, where Uranus is about the big picture, and it's about information. And of course the moon in the sign of Pisces is a very sensitive location for the moon. It can see us absorbing energies in a way which can suddenly have quite an impact on us. So as I go through each of the zodiac sign forecasts, I can illustrate exactly what's going on there. Now there are some giant other influences that come from this event chart, not least that Mercury, the planet of communication, and communication because of Uranus being in that second decan governed by Mercury, is going to be important to this next 2 weeks. Well, Mercury's forging a square with the North Node. So the North Node is like the emotional direction of travel that we're all being asked to embrace, which is about improving communication, but maybe communication around ideas, whereas Mercury communication is much more about achieving something tangible because of the Earth rulership, the elemental rulership of the sign of Virgo. So we have all this Earth battling against this water with this rather random Earth influence in the sign of Taurus, which is quite a radical, sudden and unsettling influence. And then the North Node is at odds with Mercury. So it's important that we're sincere in our communications. I think that's one of the things to grasp from this. Now actually Mercury forges a gorgeous angle to Venus. So if we're working hard at our communication in a relating sense, then that could work well. And perhaps there is something around the more practical physical elements of our life that needs to be balanced to the more emotional and spiritual and psychological areas coming through the full moon in Pisces, where if we have a conversation we can get some greater equanimity between ourselves and someone we're working closely with. So that's Venus and Mercury working beautifully together. But this event has one very influential element to it, and that is a Grand Cardinal Cross. And this comes about because if we look at the cluster of energy that we've got in the sign of Capricorn, which is said to be spiritually where we finish our journeys in this lifetime, we've got Saturn conjuncting with Pluto, which in itself enormously influential planetary combination, which has been having a huge impact all of this year pretty well. And then we have Mars, which is in a direct right angle with Saturn, and you know it's very close to being exactly in a right angle, 90 degrees with Pluto. So that's tension created. But then you can see that we have Venus in a square with Mars. And then on the other side of the heavens we have Juno, the asteroid that's to do with relating, which is also forging a square with both Saturn and Pluto and with Venus. So essentially we have four 90-degree angles, the squares, all pulsating against each other, trying to get the upper hand. Now I think it's safe to say that Mars, Saturn and Pluto are probably much more stroppy, obviously difficult influences than say Venus and Juno on the face of it. But I don't think that we can take Juno out of the equation completely, because obviously when Mars and Venus are at a right angle it can make us a bit more lusty, but it also means that we can be a little bit out of sync when it comes to balancing the more masculine and feminine sides of our relating actions. And with Juno also in a square with Venus and Saturn and Pluto, but in an opposition with Mars, I think we can see that despite the fact that Mercury and Venus forging that gorgeous sextile, there is plenty of potential for difficulties with this particular cardinal Grand Cross. So what does it mean? Well, basically cardinality is to do with leadership, and you can see that fire or heat is emphasized by Mars because it's in its home zone, so it's in its dignity. We have Venus in the sign of Cancer, which is very much about our feelings. It's about how we relate in a more emotional way because of the water rulership, but it's still cardinal, it's still a leader sign. Libra is a leader sign. Juno here is actually very good, I feel, because it's a natural sign of relating. But of course we have Saturn in its dignity in the sign of Capricorn, so in its home zone, and we have Pluto and Jupiter. Now Jupiter of course is not at its best in the sign of Capricorn. The last time it was there with Pluto in 2008 we had that financial crisis too, and of course this time we got the COVID impact. So what I feel that we're going to get is where emotions and the way people want to relate, which is coming through the prism of that very sensitive full moon in the sign of Pisces, but certainly based on the universal central time in a very sensitive way, the practicalities because of the 6th house, and of course it's opposite the most practical of all the signs really, I feel, which is Virgo, and in this chart a Virgo ascendant. So what I feel that we're getting is that a lot of power plays can be going on to try to balance those practicalities and those emotional dimensions. Who will win out? When Mars and Pluto and Saturn are in a right angle, which they broadly are through to the middle of October, in this particular sweep, we can see sort of posturing on the international stage. We can see sort of outrageous strikes against, democracy, for example, what's happened in Belarus. Or it could be that it's working out more in a personal context. When Venus and Pluto, for example, are in opposition, somebody can offer us something that seems mightily attractive and tempting, but it can most certainly have strings attached. So if someone does make an approach to you financially or around a relationship, and they seem to sort of like be very alluring, just be very cautious about what the downside could be. Also with Venus in opposition with Saturn, that could lead to an end in a relationship which is really quite weak. So I feel the practicality of Virgo can be very good because it helps us to tease out the detail of what we need to grapple with, but we can't forget to include the subconscious, the psychological element, the feeling and the healing. If we bring that into play, we're going to get a more unified approach. But in general, there's a lot of potential for frustration, for limitation, for things that we want to manifest, which is often the case, isn't it, with a full moon, that something's coming up to a peak. What could come up to the surface now, I think, is a lot of frustration, which has been building up over the last few weeks, as Saturn and Mars in particular have been in a right angle. So please stay with me as I go through each of the 12 zodiac signs to give you a more precise understanding of what the next 2 weeks holds for them. But I think we are going to see a really powerful 2 weeks from the 2nd of September in our personal situations and for the world stage. Aries, the more impetuous side of your ruler Mars, is definitely being checked at this time, whether it's around home, family, professional aims, ambitions and goals. And the best you can do really is to try to listen to your 6th sense, which is coming through the Pisces full moon. If you do just grapple with the details, actually Mercury on this particular full moon is forging a terrific angle to Pluto and Saturn, which can see you make significant progress if you pace things and don't expect things to go quicker than you hope. If you try to force the pace, I think it will just create more frustration. But just be aware that in a professional situation, somebody may not be quite as loyal and quite as much as an ally as you might like. Will they tell you outright to your face? No. It's much more likely that there could be some gossip doing the rounds. Don't embrace gossip, don't invest in it, don't say anything to a third party who might not have your best interest that could be used against you. But in general, you're being asked to be very patient at this time, but just keep working away on what you can influence, but stay very in tune with your inner voice. Now Taurus, this full moon is an opportunity for you to think about your time management. Now, because Uranus is such a restless influence in your situation, it's possible that you have been cutting out elements that no longer work for you anyway, perhaps broadly over the last couple of years. Pretty well since the middle of May, since the time of your birthday in 2018, I feel there's been some kind of change or shift going on. And of course the gathering or posse of influences in Capricorn is all about shaking things up and being open to the new. So whether it's a friendship, whether it's a love relationship, or whether it's your social situation, making sure that everything is flowing along in a nicely aligned way is going to be your aim. But that old maxim of we can't please all of the people all of the time really comes up very strongly for me, for you. So you may need to make some clear decisions about where you're going to invest your loyalties, your affections, and your passions. Now Gemini, obviously your ruling planet Mercury is in your 4th solar house at the moment, and it's squaring up with the North Node in your sign. The North Node is giving you a real opportunity to be much more creative in your approach, but with Venus, which can govern money as much as relationships, being really whacked by that opposition with Saturn and Pluto, I feel that you need to use the resources you do have very astutely at this moment. With Pisces being high in the sky in your midheaven, you can be very impressionable in terms of the contacts you have and the interfaces that you experience. But whatever success you're trying to create for yourself, it has to feel right. You have to feel comfortable with it. So you may be offered a fantastic role, but if it's not actually something you really want to do, or you can really invest in, or you'd really feel passionate about, and Mars is asking you to really invest in the things that do inspire you right through to the early part of January next year, I would think very carefully, even if it seems like a great offer, because actually it could crush your spirit over a period of time if you do something that really isn't very rewarding. Now Cancer, with Venus in your sign and this full moon emphasizing the bigger picture of your communications, sort of like higher knowledge, the 9th house, travel, it's very important for you to feel that your everyday world, which is governed by where Mercury and Virgo is actually not just going through the motions, that you feel that it has got something that's really uplifting about it. But Mars is making you quite ambitious at this time, and will continue to do so through to early January next year. So trying to find a way to deal with this Cardinal Grand Cross is going to take some care, along with the dynamics of the full moon itself. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversations, a lot of discussions, a lot of information being exchanged, and all you can do is stay resolutely open-minded, which is what Uranus is encouraging you to do. Don't make decisions based completely on past experience, because your inner world has shifted so much. Even the situations that you turned down in the past, which may have been the right thing to do at that time, may look differently if you appraise them afresh now. So keep an open mind. For sure, you can take a lead role and be an authority figure in whatever you do, but people are watching carefully how you interact with them. And because you're a cardinal sign, and because this Cardinal Grand Cross is so important at this time, I think you need to maximize cooperation in order to get the most from your situation. And if you start to try to over manage things, I think it's actually because you might be a little bit fearful. So don't try too hard, essentially. Try to trust to some degree about what the universe will give you back, and other people, but with reasonable expectations. Now Leo, you have Venus, of course, in your 12th solar house, so that's already quite a sensitive area, and it could mean that you're reviewing a relationship at this very time. Also, the full moon itself is in your 8th house of where you share things, where you invest a lot financially or emotionally, it doesn't really matter. The 2nd house, where the sun is about everyday resources. So for you, the immediate impact of the full moon could be about juggling the ins and outgoings of your situation, particularly if there has been a change in your income due to the impact of COVID. But what Uranus is saying to you is really stay very open and be flexible. Because you're a fixed sign, it's not always easy for you to change from what you know. Staying with what you have experienced in the past is very comforting, but it's also stifling potentially. And Mars is also saying to you, along with Uranus in the 10th house, Mars in the 9th house is saying that a change is as good as a rest. And I feel if you feel penned in at the moment in some way, that's really the most dominating emotional impact at this time, of wanting to change something, that you can create more independence and personal freedom and let go of some of the obligations that you've had more recently. But there could be a financial implication with that on this particular full moon that you have to consider. Now Virgo, of course, this full moon occurs in your opposite sign. If you've been very single-minded and focused on a particular strand that's very important to you of late, other people may feel that your relating skills have suffered a little bit. I can only be frank about that. So there may be a partner that's seeking a little bit more of your attention. They may tell you directly, they may do so in a kind of non-verbal way, with their body language perhaps being a bit closed or quiet. Or it may not be in a close personal relationship that this full moon's going to show itself. Perhaps you're going to need to be a bit more collegiate around your life in general. Now, obviously with Uranus in your 9th house, that's a very lively location, because the 9th house is about new ideas. It's about being very, very open to different ways of doing things, particularly educationally. And I don't necessarily mean formally. It could just be stuff you find on the internet. Just as important, what you research can be very illuminating at this time. But I think learning to work more closely with someone else might be the core of what this particular full moon's about. And if you can, and appreciate that it might not be absolutely perfect, there may be some areas where some concessions will need to be made, then you have an opportunity to thrive. Now Libra, obviously with Juno in your sign, opposite Mars, and Venus is in the 10th house of your situation, which is very much about your ability to pull things towards you professionally. And Mars in your 7th house is urging you to reinforce your boundaries. I think you've really got to the end of your tether almost around a family or emotional situation, or in a professional situation where someone's not really listening to how you feel. And you may feel that there's some psychological ganging up going on in some part of your situation. You may sense the vibes and the runes are not so good, but someone might not necessarily be telling you. All you can do is deal with the information you've got. The only decisions you have complete control over are your own. And I think Mars is saying to you, in its square with Saturn and Pluto, if you feel that someone's being profoundly unfair, push back. But you also have to be crafty and shrewd. You can't necessarily win every single war when Mars and Saturn are in a square. So pick your battles, but if it's really particularly unfair the way someone's been, push back and bring to the surface something that you have been worrying about, if you need to do so, or share in a very trusted confidant. Now Scorpio, for you the moon occurs in the gorgeous 5th house, which is all about joys and the expression of your passions. But on the other side of the heavens, the sun in the 11th house is about your future direction. So are you, in terms of your future direction, actually embracing the things that do give you that sense of uplift, that sense of enjoyment? If you're going through the motions a little bit, I think you're being asked to change, particularly around a relationship with Uranus in your opposite sign. So in this particular polarity of the 5th and the 11th houses on this full moon, it could be around a relationship situation, either the time you spend around a group or friends, or it may be more in a personal relationship. If you're not really enjoying it anymore, Uranus is pushing you to make a change, and that may be something you're resisting. But with that Grand Cardinal Cross, it's very, very important to understand that the communication of the message that's important to you, the way you express that, is going to be important to your reputation, really. Because you could be very outspoken with Pluto and Saturn in your 3rd house. Just tell it as it is. With Mars, your traditional ruler, in the 6th house, that's quite a pincing, sharp location for Mars. You could just tell it how it is, but there will be some fallout from that. So if you need to escape from something, use a degree of decorum. Now, Sagittarius. This full moon occurs in one of the most tender parts of your annual cycle, the 4th house. And this is where Neptune, the planet of dreams, has been since 2012. And if you think back to 2012, probably since then there's been a lot of change around your emotional situation, your family life, your outlook, your personal relationship with yourself in those 8 years. And that can be reviewed by this particular full moon. But the sun is in the part of your horoscope that's to do with ambitions, goals and aims and raising your profile, seeking the limelight. That's fine to do all that, but do you really feel comfortable with it? That's what the moon's asking you. Now, Uranus for you is in a very practical area, so it points to me, especially with the location of the sun being in the 10th house of how people view you, and Uranus being in the 6th house of the actual job, the processes you do within your job, that you need more stimulation and variety around your work, as well as feeling emotionally satisfied. If you're not getting it, it could make you think again. But of course, there's also the role of Mars. Mars squaring up with Pluto particularly can give you a lot of desire. So if you're wanting to meet someone, and especially with Venus in the 8th house, I think the yearning for something deeper and more connecting, perhaps even more sultry, can be very strong on the back of this full moon period over the next 2 weeks. But the power potential of the cardinality of this Grand Cross means that if you force something quickly in order to get your needs met, it could create quite a reaction. Capricorn. Now, this particular full moon occurs in your sector of everyday communications. And the 3rd house is not the best location for the moon, because that's all about our mental capacity. It's about thinking quickly. We're not necessarily wired to be very open about our emotions, because that can make us feel quite vulnerable. And I think for you, the secret of the next 2 weeks is going to be to try to match what you say with how you really feel. And with Uranus in a very rebellious part of your situation, it is making you more risk-taking anyway, more authentic about saying who you are, not being quite so cautious and hidebound. You were created to be very thorough and sticking at things for the long term. But at this particular part of your journey, I think you're really being asked to be a bit more flexible and open to new possibilities that can come with Uranus in your 5th solar house. The cardinality, the Grand Cross that you've got, well, that's quite complex, because with Pluto and Saturn in your sign, you are wanting to directly control your immediate destiny. But Mars is in your 4th house of the home and family, and Venus is in your sector of relating, and Juno your sector of public reputation. Is there something around a relationship that's making you so unhappy that you will push it to the break point at this time? If that is the case, the communicational nodes that are being emphasized, the polarity between the 3rd house of the full moon and the 9th house of the sun, suggests you choose your words with care. Now, Aquarius. This particular full moon occurs in your 2nd house, which is very much about everyday finances, self-worth, how we create a sense of foundations and security in our life. So if there is some kind of limitation around your resources, I think it is going to bring to the surface those concerns. But an area that you can use to modify your resources could be around your home. For example, Uranus can push you to declutter. If you sell off items you no longer use, you could raise a tidy sum through that well-known auction site, or perhaps there is some other way that you can recycle and create more space. But it's very important not to equate your value in this life purely on what you've got in the bank. Remember, you're a sign of idealism, so do hold with that. The cardinality for you still suggests that dark, deep stuff from the past is still calling out for your attention, and it may be difficult to just push that off completely. Now Pisces, of course, the full moon occurs in your sign, so for you this is very much about relationships. If you're in a relationship of any kind which is not meeting your needs, you could find yourself being much more strident and outspoken over the next 2 weeks because of the role of Uranus. Uranus actually forges a very positive angle, a trine to the sun and a sextile to the moon in your sign. So this gives you an opportunity to say how you feel if you feel someone's not been listening to you. They've been too self-absorbed in what they're doing. But in terms of that cardinal Grand Cross, Mars is giving you a real desire to have firmer foundations, do better financially. Venus is in the part of your horoscope which sees you yearning for some kind of true love. And with Saturn and Pluto both opposite Venus, Pluto can bring something magical into your world over the next 2 weeks, but equally Saturn could bring something to an end that just isn't working. And because of the polarity of this full moon, it's very much about you meeting your needs in terms of the balance of the give and get that goes on in all relationships of all kinds. If that's not in tune, this could be your turn and time to really make your point. But equally, if you're single, this full moon could flag up a desire to move into a relationship. But with Saturn in opposition to Venus, it better be the right relationship or it will have legacy issues down the track. It's been a real pleasure sharing all those zodiac signs with you. Remember, you can download your free natal chart below. Or if you'd like to ascend above your zodiac sign, embrace more serious astrology, you can get a 12-month personal forecast and a character analysis for 30% off, or you can check out my testimonials if you'd like to have a one-to-one with me personally. But for now, do stay safe, take care, and goodbye for now.